This is James here with the Oracle Outlook for the week starting June the 29th, 2020. Thanks so much for tuning in and joining me for this week's video reading. I am so happy to have you here. This week I'm breaking in a new deck in my collection, one that I was very excited to get. I am working with the Playing Marseille by Ryan Edward, and so this deck is really special to me because it is a Tarot de Marseille inspired deck, but the minor arcana, or the pip cards, if you're Tarot de Marseille fluent, are made up of playing cards. And so the reason why this deck fascinates me is because, and I'm sure I've talked about this in the past a long time ago when the Arcana Tarot playing cards came out. So, for those of you who may be new to the channel and don't know my backstory, I got into reading cards when I had a dream that I was reading my own playing cards. Now, in waking life, I had never done that up to that point in time. But in the dream, I was doing my own reading, writing it down, which I still do to this day, writing it down, but I was using playing cards, and I was reading for myself. And so I woke up from the dream, and I had this feeling that the dream was significant. And so a few months later, I got my first tarot deck. So the universe is wonderful when it comes to dreams because it does this wonderful thing that I call course correction, or you come to some sort of interpretation, or understanding of a dream, and then it follows up with another dream. So the follow-up dream I had after I had been involved in tarot for a few months, I think at this point, I had a dream that I was in a school. So now the school is a visual pun for learning something about yourself, right? So I'm in this school, and in this room that I'm in, I'm standing next to a house of cards, right? And so, again, something I've never done in waking life was build a house of cards. But normally, people build those houses of cards with playing cards, right? And the dream emphasized it by putting it in a spotlight. So it was spotlighted on the floor next to me. So I felt in the dream compelled to bend over and start picking up the cards. And by the time I was done and I looked in my hands, I had a combination of tarot cards and playing cards. So for me at the time, I interpreted that as blending the playing card way of reading cards and tarot together to form my own kind of synthesis, or come to my own way of reading the cards, my own method, right? But I also thought too, like the dream was saying, like, yeah, okay, that was good that you started reading cards and you went for tarot cards, but don't forget the playing cards, right? So when I got the tarot, tarot playing cards all those years ago, I felt like, ooh, that deck reminded me of the dream. This one really reminds me of the dream, especially with the fact that I have been working with Tarot de Marseille for the last couple of years now. So I'm really excited to be working with this deck in this space at this time. So again, I'm working with the Playing Marseille by Ryan Edward, and if I didn't say it before, the deck is published by US Game Systems Incorporated. So now that I've set things up, let's get to the table and see what the Playing Marseille wants to share with us about the week ahead. And here we are with the cards on the table, and we're going to take a few moments to shuffle the deck. And I'm shuffling in my usual intention for these weekly general readings, and that is for the information, for any guidance or advice to come through the cards that is going to be most helpful and beneficial regarding the upcoming week. Feeling one more time will be good. All right. Now I'm going to go ahead and cut the deck. cards out. So I'm sticking with my line of 5, so I'm looking for 5 cards in the fan that are getting my attention. So I have the 5 cards selected, and now I'm going to take the remainder of the deck up and move that to one side. Now I'm going to take a moment to readjust the line. All right. And so this week, I'm going to start with the middle card. For me, the middle card is going to be representing the central issue or the focus for the week ahead. And here we have the devil. Okay, so the devil for me can represent working through some kind of limitation or restriction, and that's because the two, they're known as imps, are tied to the pedestal that the devil figure is standing on. So this usually represents some sort of limitation or restriction. So it's about thinking about or considering in what ways do you limit yourself, do you restrict yourself. You know, this is metaphorically some type of bondage situation, right? In what way are you creating bondage, right? Bondage, again, that forms limitation or restriction, or creates or results in limitation and restriction, right? So there is that. For me, the devil card can talk about, you know, unhealthy habits, unhealthy tendencies, unhealthy behaviors, right? So it could be, that could be the way that we are limiting or restricting ourselves, right? So what kind of situation that would appear to be unhealthy in your life that you are being asked to maybe liberate yourself or free yourself up from, right? So there's that. The devil card can usually represent some form of enlightenment. I usually look at this as being unenlightened about something, being in the dark about something. So it could just be a matter of engaging in behavior because you just don't know any better, right? I'm thinking of the late Maya Angelou, the late Dr. Maya Angelou, and she had an expression saying that when you know better, you do better, right? So this could just be moving through a period of time where maybe in the past you didn't know any better, and then something happens due to a situation you find yourself maybe experiencing some kind of limitation and restriction, and you now know better, right? So that's what I'm seeing with this. This is an idea of like maybe becoming more aware of our unhealthy habits, tendencies, behaviors, and we engaged in those behaviors because we didn't know any better at the time, and now we're in a space where we now know better, right? And we want to do better. So that's what I'm seeing with the devil card. Another meaning of the devil card for me, and this goes with what I talked about in last week's reading when I worked with my own deck, the Oracle of Himm, this card is also for me about conditioning and programming, with the idea that this card can represent psychological blocks, right? So with that in mind, it could just be, again, taking a look at our conditioning and programming, or if we chose to do that last week, then maybe we're at a place where we're understanding that with the conditioning and programming of our past, of our prior experiences, of our history, that we didn't know any better then. But again, we're coming to a place where maybe we're becoming more enlightened, and we don't want to be that person we used to be, right? It could also be, as I'm talking out loud, that maybe we're wanting to move beyond our past, and for some reason people are keeping us tied to our past, right? Because the devil card in this regard could be about mistakes or errors in making, you know, or errors in decision making, I should say. And, you know, maybe people are not wanting to free us up from those mistakes made. The Devil card, finally, before I move on, is also about the things that we obsess about, right? So this could be about, like, what are you obsessing about? And maybe that obsession is keeping you tied to a particular person, condition, circumstance, or experience, right? Because you keep dwelling on it, right? So this card is just asking you, like, what are you obsessing about? And is there a way that you would be willing to move beyond that, to release that, to let that go, right? So there's that. So now that's a lot to say about the middle card. So let's take a look at the surrounding cards that will offer us more information, right? I'm being reminded as I'm saying that I'm looking at the Devil card and I'm seeing a Kipper technique in my mind. So I'm just going to go with it. Going with the idea that the imps here are tied to this pedestal. It's making me feel like the cards on either side of the Devil are connected to that, right? Because in Kipper there are cards that are known as connector cards, right? So, and I keep getting more information. So the other thing that I want to say about the Devil card before I finally move on is that maybe we need to take a look at who we're putting on pedestals. I'm looking at the Devil being on a pedestal, and it just may be a matter of who we are putting on pedestals, meaning like who are we idolizing, because we may have an issue regarding who we have chosen to put on a pedestal. It reminds me of the idea of where we put people on pedestals, and then when they reveal that they're human, we want to tear them down, right? So it may be a matter of looking at that. Who are we choosing to put on pedestals? Because we may have a realization that the person is actually a human being, and so then we may have to resist the temptation. This is where the temptation comes in. Resist the temptation of tearing that person down for being human. Okay. So now I'm going to take a look at the card opening the line up. And on this one side, wow, you can't make this stuff up. Okay, so here we have the Two of Hearts. For me, the Two of Hearts is the relationship card, right? So there, because the hearts for me can represent feelings and emotions and relationships. So here we have an emotional bond or an emotional connection. What I'm immediately noticing is that there are two fish-like figures along with the two hearts and the two cups. So there's something about pairing, couple, relationship, just like there are two imps in the middle card looking at the Devil, right? And just as they're looking at the Devil, these two fish-like creatures are looking at the center heart, right? So there's something about an emotional bond or an emotional connection, right? In connection to this idea of maybe something that's unhealthy or questioning a relationship in which we feel maybe a sense of limitation or restriction. The word that's coming to me is maybe somebody is considering the idea of whether or not they feel trapped in a relationship and needing to take a look at that, right? Now, if we are experiencing a maybe more challenging relationship, then this card would be about, sharing one's feelings or emotions, that kind of thing. This card makes me feel like the expression is I feel the same way or the feeling is mutual, right? But this in and of itself is talking about sharing one's feelings, sharing one's emotions with another party, right? Now I'm also looking at this and I look at the top portion of the image and it sometimes can look like these two fish-like creatures are smelling flowers because in a traditional Tarot de Marseille deck, this would be a floral arrangement, right? So for me, it's a pun for, taking time to smell the roses or smell the flowers, right? And it may be with this card, something is coming up where it's going to maybe limit or restrict you in some way, and maybe with time, or maybe I'm feeling a sense with what's been going on with the COVID-19 or coronavirus situation where people are at this point in time still experiencing some degree of lockdown, right? Then it could just be a matter of, if that is the case, how can you maybe change your feelings about that situation and take some time to quote unquote smell the flowers? What would the lockdown or the restriction be actually allowing you to do that you wouldn't have maybe time to do any other way? right? So that's maybe just a reframe around the idea of maybe a limitation and restriction on your time, or where you feel like you can go, or what you feel like you can do, those kinds of things, right? But just with these two cards, it's making me feel like this is a week possibly to take a look at our relationships and seeing which ones are unhealthy and how we may be contributing to the state of that particular relationship or relationships, right? Because in a positive sense, the suit of hearts for me can represent healing. And if we're going to heal a relationship, it has to be a mutual thing, right? Going with the idea that this is about mutuality, right? Now, it could also be about people willing to accept or embrace people's differences, because the fish on the card are not exactly identical. They don't look identical, right? But they're engaged in a similar activity, right? So it's making me feel about like meeting people in the middle or meeting people where they are. If we go with what's going on in the collective regarding race and race relations, that might be where this is coming in, right? It's about healing that, but the way to heal that is to accept people for who they are, meaning embrace people's differences, because, and I'm going to walk out on a limb here, the devil card, when it comes to racism, is usually rooted in two things: fear and ignorance. And that's the devil. And so it's about maybe what can we do to change that. And sometimes with some people, it goes back to conditioning and programming, right? People are taught to be racist, right? So it's that. It's making me feel like that. But if we're going to heal that, it's about learning to embrace the differences of other people and sometimes meeting people where they are. Okay, so that is the two of hearts for me. So now let's move on to the middle card. Yeah, and here we have the three of spades. First thing that I'm going to say with the three of spades, the three of spades is a card that can talk about a misunderstanding, miscommunication. So I will say, in the maybe more personal lens or personal sense, people may be looking at relationships this week, wanting to clear up misunderstandings, miscommunications. And then the devil card in that regard is talking about misunderstandings, muddles, misperceptions. Again, if there is a misunderstanding, it may be at the root of it two things. Number one, in the more benign sense, person just didn't know any better, right? In the maybe more deeper sense, then this is about dealing with people's shadows or shadow aspects, right? Or that there's some deep rooted conditioning and programming that's playing a role or a part, or that's coming out in the relationship to be seen, right? I'm hearing the Kelly Clarkson song in my head, and the song that I'm hearing is Dark Side, and the line that I'm hearing is, everybody has a dark side. Do you love me? Do you love mine? Is the lyrics of that I'm hearing in my head. So it could just be, again, it's about understanding that everybody has a side that is not so pleasant, not so wonderful, and again, it's more their shadow side, maybe even their ego. People are rooted in their ego. And it's about, like, if you're going to choose to be in relationship with that person, it may be a matter of just coming to a place where understanding that aspect of that person is there. And then you get to choose with your eyes wide open rather than closed whether or not you can continue to engage or relate with that person or persons, right? So the three of spades between these two cards talks about this idea about miscommunication, misunderstanding, the potential for a problem if it's not addressed, that it could grow and worsen, right? Because the three is about growth and development, but with the spades attached to it, it's usually a situation that potentially could get worse rather than better. And it, as I'm talking out loud, and I love talking out loud, and being reminded of the expression that sometimes, in order for a situation to get to the other side, sometimes it has to get worse before it can get better, right? So this may be a situation where we're dealing with a situation that could be getting worse before it gets better, right? Now, I will say, if I bring this back to the idea of the coronavirus and COVID-19, whichever terminology you want to use, then this card is talking about that, because this card can also be about x-rays, right? So for me, I can see that as, and I'm not a doctor, so I have to put my disclaimer out there, but I'm seeing like x-rays, so that's a visual pun for me about examination, right? But it can also be about taking a closer look, examination, about a situation, right? So again, the Three of Spades is a card that can talk about misperceptions, misunderstandings, miscommunications, the potential for an experience to get worse before it gets better, that kind of thing. And the last thing I will say, this is another scenario that's coming to me in the moment. If we go with the idea that this is talking about a relationship, possible a love relationship, then here we have problematic cards. Because with the Three of Spades, we have the interference of a third party. And then the Devil card following that can be a card about wrongdoing. And so there may be some temptation being presented by a third party in an existing relationship, if I go with order of the cards, right? So that is something else to consider for someone out there. Okay, so now let's take a look at what's on the other side of the Devil. And here we have, so here we have the Knight of Hearts. And so the first thing that I see in the visual is that we have hearts repeating, right? So there's something about emotions, relationships, and feelings that are going to be part of either a personal experience or the collective experience this week, right? Now, the Knight here is offering, so this usually is about offering something up, and usually I read with direction in mind, so I usually look to the card on the left of this card. So here we have this figure, the Knight, presenting something to the Devil, right? So it could just be a matter of, if we go with the idea that this may be about people who are maybe not as informed or not as enlightened as other people, what can we offer to them that would help heal that state of not being enlightened or not being informed, right? It's making me feel like for some people it may be a matter of offering people some love, because it's making me feel like giving people some love who maybe are in a place where they are acting out from a place of not just knowing any better, right? They're trying to do better, right? And so how can we help them or offer them some support as they're trying to do better, right? Now, I will say this, going back to the last scenario that I just talked about before I turn this card over, this can also be the Lover card, right? Somebody who's giving his or her heart, right? So it could just be a matter of, here again, we may have a situation in which there is an existing relationship and there may be the presence of a third party, right? Because then this card, it could be about somebody who's charming, somebody who's seductive, but also too, somebody who is coming into a situation and they're not willing to commit. Because here we have, with these two cards, this for me can be about commitment phobia, right? And then here we have maybe a person who loves the idea of something, but his commitment could use some work. So we have something here about commitment too this week, right? And so it could just be a matter of questioning how committed we are to engaging in some process of moving beyond some sort of limitation and restriction. It may be requiring some level of commitment on our parts to move beyond it. And then we have to ask ourselves the hard question is, how committed are we to that process? Right? But I'm seeing with this card, this is about offering something up, giving of one's heart, and it could be a matter of, for some people, that you have to be careful about how giving you are in a relationship, especially if that relationship is not healthy. So that is the Knight of Hearts. Let's take a look at the last card in the line. Oh, we have another Knight. Okay, so a pattern is emerging. So here we have another Knight. So Knights for me can symbolically represent focus. So again, there's something about what are we focusing on? You know, what are we giving our time and attention to, right? The idea here with the two knights not facing each other, here we have two people, again, maybe are in a state of disagreement. Their backs are to each other, right? Not seeing a situation the same way, or that they're wanting to make some progress and wanting to move forward, but there's disagreement as to how that's going to happen, right? Because they're each looking in different ways. So they each maybe have a different focus, a different vision on what that would look like. One of my meanings for the Knight of Clubs can represent change being in the air, right? And so here's another thing I'm seeing here. With this card, it could be, you know, maybe defending one's position, right? So if there is something having to do with somebody's wrongdoing or a mistake being made, you know, somebody may feel like they're on defense, needing to defend their position, right? It could also be, too, again, wanting to move forward because the horse is moving toward the Knight of Cups, like they're following in the same direction, but then something has distracted this person, and now the person's looking behind them. They're looking at where they came from, right? Or they're looking at maybe returning to a past or previous experience, right? So it could just be a matter of like, how can you move beyond the space of allowing yourself to either be preoccupied, distracted, or pulled back into a past situation when maybe you know it's better to move forward. The clubs can represent something having to do with social or the public. So this could be about friendships, relationships. If it's not maybe a romantic relationship, hearts, right? Remember we said this could be a romantic relationship. It may be something that's more platonic, right? But there is something about the parties involved feeling the same way, right? But here we have an idea of like maybe which direction to move forward in, and there's a conflict or challenge with that. So what I'm going to do is, because this knight is looking in a direction where there isn't a card, I'm going to draw an additional card. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a moment to widen this out. I'm going to move the cards over. So I can create space to add an additional card. So I'm asking the question before I shuffle the cards, what is the Knight of Clubs? What is the Knight of Clubs focusing on? What is he looking at? Okay, so that's the question I'm focusing on as I shuffle the cards. So the camera is wide enough for you to see me shuffling. All right. Now I'm going to cut the deck. And you can see me cutting it towards the line. Now, interestingly enough, I'm going to work with this card. Maybe you can see it at the top here, but there's a card that was left out. So I'm going to use that as the card because apparently it wants to be acknowledged, right? Okay. So now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to move the line over slightly and we'll zoom in just a little bit. All right. So now let's turn the card over, and remember now that the intention for this card is to see what this knight is looking at, or maybe what the knight is defending himself from. Okay, so here we have the Two of Clubs. So again, repeating pattern, we have two cards from the same suit. So clubs, again, one of its meanings for me as a suit can represent the public or something social. So this may be friendships, because that is one of the meanings of this card. So very interesting. So it may be that we're moving away from a love relationship, and maybe someone involved, wants to still be friends. So it's making me feel like there may be a challenge in a particular relationship, because I'm hearing the expression in my head, well, can't we still be friends? Kind of thing. So maybe somebody's wanting to change their status in a relationship, right? But if it's not that, then this is about people working together, right? Because the suit of clubs can represent work. And then if that's the case, then this is about a working relationship, right? Or people partnering up to work together, right? And if that's the case, then this would be a relationship in which there is a mutual benefit. Just like over here, I talked about people feeling the same way and the feeling being mutual. This is a card that represents a mutual, beneficial relationship, partnership kind of thing. But it could also be, too, I'm seeing more of maybe a social aspect of it, too, if we go with the idea that this was possibly about race relations, like I said earlier, then this is about, people coming together and maybe doing some work together. But there may be a sense of like, coming to a place of agreement about that, because these two people, the knights, are wanting to focus on this, wanting to change it, but there's disagreement as to how that's going to happen. So it could just be a matter of, we have a 2 here and a 2 here. So this could be about, again, coming to some kind of agreement, wanting to be of help. This card here at the end of the line can represent receiving help, right? Because the 2 is a number of help and support, right? So it's making me feel like maybe with the social issue of race and race relations, this could be about like maybe partnerships and allies, right? It may be not enough for people who are affected by racism, right? But it's also about the people who could be potential allies offering their support. And it may be a matter of people wanting to do that and maybe not being clear or not being sure as the best way or means to do that. So that's what I'm seeing with this card, the 2 of clubs at the end. Again, remember, this card is about a relationship, a partnership, one that may be having a social slant to it, or, a friendship, but wanting to offer some kind of help or support. But it's also about a relationship in which there is something that's beneficial to both parties involved, right? So as I'm saying that out loud, I just talked about it in a larger social sense. But if we bring this back to some of the aspects that I talked about in terms of maybe a personal, emotional bond or connection or romantic relationship even, then it could be a matter of shifting from something that's potentially unhealthy to something that's mutually beneficial for both parties involved. So it would make me feel, going back to this, that maybe the slant here is that somebody's in a relationship in which maybe they're doing all the giving and the person is doing all the taking, and that could be literal or metaphorical. And it's about how can we change the energy of that and make it something that's mutually beneficial for both parties involved, right? So on that note, I will go ahead and end this week's Oracle Outlook reading here. I am James Himm Mitchell, and I want to thank you for sharing space here with me for this week's reading, and I look forward to sharing the same space with you again in our next video reading together. So until then, I am hoping that you are having the best day possible, and I'm hoping that you are having the best week possible. Take care.